Hey, welcome back. Thanks for joining me for another episode. The finish line is slowly starting to come into view here on this Jupiter 2 model build. And if you remember last episode, I covered installing all the walls and beams into the floor and getting everything together and ready to move on to the electronics, which is what we have here now. We've got the bottom of the board with all my walls and beams installed. I've installed a couple of little breadboards here for powering with 9-volt. And everything I've done so far with the walls on the outside, again, if you remember from previous episodes, they're kind of self-contained. They have all their wiring in the back of the wall with their resistors and everything, and I just need to take these little pigtail connections here and solder them to my boards on the bottom of the floor, which is what I have right here. I have some wooden blocks in various areas underneath the floor to hold it upright to keep it from setting on the wires and fiber optics and such. And the ring I've put on top, it is temporarily held in place with just some tape in some various areas as well, so that I can then pick it up and carefully rotate it to work on the underside. And I do have all of the walls that require 9 volts soldered up now to these boards that have 9 volt. So next up, I'm going to be moving on to fiber optics. And I'm going to start out with fiber optics that require a solid light that will not be blinking. And these ones here do that. And what I also have here is a LED inside of a piece of shrink tube which I made, and I will be running the fibers into the shrink tube to illuminate them. So I've got my LED here with the shrink tube, and I've taken these fibers, cut them down to the proper length, put a little bit of tube around the end to hold them together, and I'm just going to shove them inside this piece of shrink tube. This is a light here for the main center console that is always lit, and these will constantly be on the entire time the model's powered. And I also have these little clips here, these little wire clips, which I'm going to be using on the underside to hold things down to the underside of the floor as well. So I've got these fibers here which go to the communication center. These will all be blinking. I have 2 different blinkers for these, and I'm just going to randomly poke them into these 2 blinkers which are done here, and I have them hot glued down to the underside of the board. They're going to be going to this board over here, which is being powered by a Trinket Arduino basically. So I've soldered those up to this. I've got their ground pins and their hot pins going here, and the rest of these will be for the other blinking fibers. This board here, which I've glued to the bottom, is for the wall beams. Again, going to the Trinket. This will control the pulsating light of the wall beams, and they'll all be running along this rails here. So I've got some of the wall beams already soldered in, and I'm just going to go through and continue soldering in the rest of my 3 wires from the wall beams into this board. And I have a rail for hot, a rail for ground, and a rail for the data pin. And here I have the data pins, the grounds and hots all soldered into place, and I'll put my 3 wires in the end here from the Trinket. So to make my light emitters for the fibers, all I've done here is I've taken a 3mm LED, and I've taken a small piece of shrink tube, fitted over the end of the LED, and then I'm using my liquid electrical tape to glue the shrink tube into place around the LED, and because it's so thick and black, it also acts as a light blocker so no light leaks out the back side. And I've got a bunch of these that I have made up here. And again, the light will shine out the end here for the fibers, and these are for the rest of my flashing LEDs for the fibers throughout the rest of the walls. So I've glued 3 into position here. These 3 are going to be for 3 sets of fibers from the main center console of the bridge. And I've cut them down into length, and I have separated each console into 3 portions, and each of these 3 portions will go into these 3 fibers here. to give me 3 random blinkings. So I'm going to start out with the center console, and then I did the 2 side consoles as well. So I basically have 9 sets of fibers, 3 each, running into each of the 3 LEDs. These LEDs run down to this board here, which is being controlled by the trinket for the blinking. And that'll give me 3 random blinkings for all the fibers. I've also installed 3 LEDs here for the little LED fibers that are going to be at the top of the freezing walls, and you can see all those here. These are the little portions above the freezing walls. And again, I've separated all those into groups of 3, run them into the LEDs, which go to this board back here to be powered by the trinket. So with all the fibers run to the LEDs, it's time to move on to this little buck converter here. This is a voltage regulator so that I can input 9 volts and output 3 volts to this little board here to run my 2 motors that I have on the interior. So what I'm going to do to start out with here is I'm going to connect some leads to the positive and ground sides of my little board, and I'm also going to connect power to the input side, positive and ground. So that's 9 volts going in, and then I have clips on my board running to my meter so that I can adjust the voltage. I'm getting 9 volts, as you see, and then I can use this little pot here and trim it down and get it down to the 3 volts that I need to power the 2 motors that I have, the one running the reels in the translator and the one running the radar in the center monitor of the main console. And there we have it down to 3 volts. So I've glued this into position, both the boards, my 9 volts in, my 3 volts going out. And the 9 volt input is running to this 9 volt board over here with the other items that are receiving 9 volts. So this motor from the center console radar I have running over here to this pot so I can slow it down to the minimum possible, which is also running to this 3 volt board to the buck converter. I also have over here the other pot which is running the motor for the translator. And that also runs to the 3 volt input here connected to the buck converter. So the motors here seem to be a bit on the noisy side. I'm going to see if I can try to deal with that in some way. So I have this foam cushion here, and I have some styrene, and what I want to try to do is make a cover to go over this to see if I can deaden the sound using the foam and the styrene. So I've made a little box here, lined it with the foam, and it will just slide right over the motor here, and hopefully this will quiet it down a bit and make it kind of like a sound booth, sound blocker. I also went in and put some of the foam in these spots here on the main center console to try to help deaden the noise a little bit as well. And then I cut this sheet of styrene that I'm going to paint and glue to the back to make it look like a complete console unit. So I've gone and I've painted it, backside black for light blocking and the other side with the Vallejo green sky, and I'm just going to glue it into position here. And here it is glued in position, and I think it looks pretty nice. So moving on, we've got the freezing tube walls here, and what I have to illuminate them is I have this nice LED strip here which fits around the entire portion of all 3 walls. And my plan is to take a piece of styrene and wrap it around, attach the LED strip to the bottom of the styrene. This will act as a diffuser because it's in front of the LEDs, and then I put another piece of styrene behind it to reflect it back. So I've attached the strips to a piece of styrene and I'm sliding in underneath all of my fibers here. And then I've gone and I've glued it into position on either end, and you can see that the strip is secured to the piece of styrene. Then I have another sheet of styrene here, which I'm going to secure on the ends and wrap around the outside to bounce the light back through the diffusion piece of styrene. And here we have the outer piece glued into position. And you can see when I turn it on, the light is in between the two of them. And the one closer to the walls acts as a diffusion to more evenly distribute the light throughout the wall beams. You'll also remember I have this section here where I built it to look like a little area underneath when you go down the steps. So I want to add some light underneath. So I've got a 3mm LED here, which I'm just going to glue into position, as I have done here, and I've just run that to the 9-volt board to power it. I also have these wires here which go to the general alarm on the wall with the translator, and those are going to go to these pins over here on the board controlled by the trinket so that I can turn them on and off at will. So here we have my trinket, and I've got a mess of alligator clips running to my flashing LEDs. Down here I got my 2 alarm LEDs, and up here I have a sample of the wall beam light. And I'm just going to power it up here to see how my coding works. And everything seems to be working. Right here you can see the wall beam strip that simulates the wall beams. And if I take a screwdriver here, I've made it so that you can adjust the speed by turning a pot. There it's a fast pulsating speed, and if I turn it the other direction, I can slow down the pulsating speed so that it can be set to pretty much any speed desired. You can have it a nice slow, long breathing or a quick, fast-paced breathing. And then we've got my 5 flashing LEDs here, which control the 3 for the main center console and the wall consoles, and the 2 different ones for the communication console. And then we got my 2 alarm lights here, the solid light and the blinking tower light. And when you hit the alarm button, the one light there activates the sign, the other one is the red flashing towers. So everything seems to be working just fine, as you can see. So I think it's about time to take the trinket and install that on the underside and start wiring all that up. So I have my trinket here. This is what's going to be controlling all of my blinking lights. The blinking lights go on these pins back here. I've got the alarm ones and the wall beams in the front here. I took these little pieces of styrene tubing that I cut out to make little standoffs so that I can glue the board down to the underside of the floor so that it'll keep it away from the floor when I'm soldering the wires. So I've hot glued these little standoffs into position, and it fits up nice there. And I've gone and I have now glued the trinket into position on the underside of the floor, and I put it here so that I can put a USB plug to update if need be. So I'm going to start out by soldering into these pins here, which are for the alarm and the wall beams. These pins over here are for my flashing LEDs. And I have soldered in my positive and ground wires from my 9-volt board, and there's the input from a 9-volt power supply going to the trinket. Then I've gone and I've soldered in my hot data and ground pins for my wall beams so that the wall beams can pulsate. And I've soldered in all 5 of my flashing LEDs for the fiber optics. Then I've also attached, for temporary, a button here so I can test the alarm, and also I've attached a pot here to adjust the speed of the wall beams. So here is just a quick sneak peek because I don't want to show too much at this time, but you can see the LEDs, the fibers are randomly blinking from the 3 random blinking LEDs. Here we have the translator in the alarm area, and if I turn the alarm on, the towers flash and the general alarm sign up above comes on and stays lit while the towers flash. You know, turn it off and they go off. The reels are running. Here we just have some more stuff lit. You can see my little room I added in the back there. Here we've got pulsing beam with part of the freezing tubes. I can adjust the speed of the beam and make it go longer and pulse and have a longer breathing period, up to quite a while if I wanted to. So that is going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for watching. Everything is wired up. Next up, I will be trying to finish wiring up the bottom portion of the saucer, as well as going over how I'm going to be attaching the upper and lower saucer together, and probably be getting into finishing up the upper half of the saucer. So we're getting very close to the end here, and I hope you're enjoying this series, and thanks again for watching. Hey, if you like watching my videos, please feel free to give them a like. And so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos, click subscribe.